of all the players I've ever watched. At this age, I've never seen a player this good. Has been an afterthought until God bless this guy, Carlos Alcaraz. He's going to change everything.
When millions of fans watch 15 seconds of social media practice clips, they see an explosive prodigy ready to reclaim his throne. But when one of the most elite masterminds in modern tennis dissects that exact same footage, he sees an athlete walking straight into an ambush. At 23, the tragedy of Carlos Alcaraz, with Patrick Mouratoglou's brutal truth, is beyond heartbreaking. Look at what the entire tennis world convinced itself over the last 10 days. After 4 agonizing months, sidelined by acute right wrist tenosynovitis, social media erupted in celebration. High-definition practice reels showed Carlos sliding across the hard courts of Murcia, ripping forehands and smiling between points. The digital consensus was unanimous. The King of New York was back. Then, legendary coach Patrick Mouratoglou stepped in front of the camera and detonated the entire narrative. Mouratoglou didn't sugarcoat the danger. He delivered an uncompromising, chilling reality check. Am I worried about Alcaraz for this US Open? Yes, I am. The preparation is going to be way too short. To hit the ball that hard every single day after being out for so long, it's painful. He'll have so many aches and pains after his first match, and we don't know how his body will react. Mouratoglou exposed the critical biomechanical blind spot that everyone on the internet ignored: the serve. We've seen a lot of footage of him hitting from the baseline, Mouratoglou warned. We don't see him serve fully. When you serve full power, this is where the wrist works the most, and this is probably the most traumatic. That technical reality completely aligns with the terrifying numbers leaking out of Spain. Spanish insider Álvaro Sánchez reported that Carlos has been operating at barely 55% of his Australian Open form, intentionally holding back on his first serve to avoid re-tearing the recovering tendon sheath. The stakes could not be more dangerous. On August 4th, Carlos pulled the plug on the Cincinnati Open, forfeiting defending champion points and surrendering his final chance at live match reps. That came on top of forfeiting Roland Garros and Wimbledon, wiping out over 4,300 ranking points. Now, the entire tennis world arrives at August 30th. Carlos walks onto the concrete of Arthur Ashe Stadium defending 2,000 points completely cold. Since the Masters format was established in 1990, not a single men's singles champion has ever won the US Open, after skipping both Canada and Cincinnati. Under head coach Samuel López, the team faces the supreme crossroads of Carlos's young career. Is Carlos Alcaraz marching straight into an unavoidable physical collapse in New York? Or can his generational genius defy Patrick Mouratoglou's brutal warning? The untold technical reality behind Mouratoglou's breakdown reveals just how close Carlos is to the ultimate breaking point. The gap between hitting a tennis ball in practice and surviving a 5-set Grand Slam match is where most athletic comebacks die. When casual observers watch practice reels on social media, they look at ball speed, footwork, and smiling celebrations between drills. They see an elite athlete moving freely and assume that full health has returned. But master coaches don't watch the highlights. They analyze the hidden physiological strain, the recovery windows between high-impact sessions, and the violent kinetic load that an unedited broadcast never shows. That is why Patrick Mouratoglou's technical dissection of Carlos Alcaraz struck such a nerve across the global tennis community. Mouratoglou didn't dismiss Alcaraz's generational talent. Instead, he exposed the biomechanical and physical reality of returning from a 4-month medical blackout. He explained that when an athlete is sidelined with acute right wrist tenosynovitis, the entire upper extremity goes through severe muscular deconditioning. The thing is, this intense training happened just a few days ago, and a Grand Slam is right around the corner, Mouratoglou explained. Did he start early enough? He's probably super tired, super sore. He should be able to do that for 2 or 3 weeks in a row to be ready for a Grand Slam. The preparation is going to be way too short when you're out for such a long time, hitting the ball that hard every single day. To come back to it, it's painful. You need time for the body to get used to it, and even more in competition. To understand the weight of Mouratoglou's warning, Look at the physical mechanics of Carlos Alcaraz's game. Carlos doesn't play conservative, passive tennis. He generates 3,200 RPMs of topspin on his forehand through extreme wrist extension and explosive radial deviation. Every single baseline strike sends violent kinetic shockwaves vibrating straight through the carpal bones and into the extensor carpi ulnaris tendon sheath. When you do that for 15 minutes in a practice session, a recovering tendon can cope. But when you are forced to do that 400 times across a 4-hour, 5-set war on unforgiving acrylic concrete, microscopic inflammation rapidly multiplies. And that is only half the danger. Mouratoglou identified an even bigger tactical and physical blind spot: the serve. In the viral training clips circulating online, fans marveled at Carlos ripping ground strokes from deep behind the baseline. But Mouratoglou pointed out what was noticeably missing from the footage: maximum effort, flat-out first serves. "We've seen a lot of footage of him hitting from the baseline," Mouratoglou highlighted. "We don't see him serve fully. When you serve full power, this is where the wrist works the most, and this is probably the most traumatic. So in general, you wait before starting to serve fully. Think about the physics of a 135 mile/hour professional first serve. During the upward kinetic chain, the shoulder externally rotates, the elbow extends, and at the absolute peak of contact, the wrist undergoes violent, high-speed internal pronation and forceful flexion. That sudden snap places hundreds of pounds of downward torsional force directly onto the wrist joint. If a tendon sheath has been inflamed for 4 months, hitting 50 maximum effort serves in a single match can instantly re-trigger severe tenosynovitis." This technical analysis from Mouratoglou perfectly validated what Spanish insider Alvaro Sanchez reported from inside the Murcia camp. Sanchez revealed that Carlos has been operating at barely 55% of his Australian Open form, intentionally holding back on his first serve in live practice sets to avoid aggravating the recovering tendon. To win a Grand Slam, you cannot protect your serve. You cannot roll the ball in at 95 miles per hour against the world's best returners. If Carlos cannot hit his spots at full velocity, elite opponents will step inside the baseline and attack him on every single service game. The roots of this crisis stretch back to April 14, 2026, on the red clay of Barcelona. Carlos won his opening round match against Otto Virtanen on Pista Rafa Nadal, but walked off the court in agony. The diagnosis was acute tenosynovitis in his right wrist. He immediately withdrew before his round of 16 match against Tomáš Machac, hoping for a brief 2-week recovery. Instead, it became a devastating 4-month competitive blackout. The Grand Slam calendar showed zero mercy. Carlos was forced to pull out of the Madrid Open and the Italian Open in Rome. In late May, he officially withdrew from Roland Garros, surrendering his French Open crown without striking a single competitive ball. Weeks later, he withdrew from Queen's Club and Wimbledon, watching his defending champion points vanish from his profile. Over 4,300 ranking points evaporated in less than 60 days. While Carlos remained confined to rehabilitation in Spain, world number 1, Jannik Sinner, dominated the summer swing, opening up a massive lead at the top of the ATP standings. Inside the Murcia training camp, head coach Samuel López had to manage both the physical injury and the psychological frustration of a 23-year-old superstar watching his empire slip away. Samuel López, who officially took over as head coach following Carlos's separation from former coach Juan Carlos Ferrero in December 2025, refused to rush the timeline. Under López, Carlos had started 2026 with 16 consecutive victories, winning his maiden Australian Open in Melbourne to complete his historic career Grand Slam, followed by a title in Doha. López understood that rushing a recovering joint onto fast, hard courts would risk permanent, career-altering damage. Working with technical specialists, López lowered Carlos's string tension by 4 pounds, softening the racket bed to absorb incoming ball vibrations. They rebuilt his game from scratch: shadow swings without strings, low compression balls, and left-handed coordination drills to maintain his timing. Then, on August 4, 2026, the moment of truth arrived in Cincinnati. Fans and tournament organizers were convinced that the Cincinnati Open would serve as Carlos's grand competitive comeback. He was seeded second and drawn on the opposite half of the bracket from Jannik Sinner. Then came the announcement that shocked the tennis world. Carlos officially withdrew from Cincinnati. Mouratoglou broke down the exact reason why that decision was made, laying out the 3 mandatory conditions an elite player must meet before stepping onto a match court. The 2 will play only if there's no risk of aggravating the injury, if they feel physically ready, and depending on their level of tennis. Mouratoglou stated, "If these 3 conditions are met, they'll play. Otherwise, they probably won't." In Cincinnati, Carlos and Samuel López realized that while the wrist was structurally healing, the second and third conditions were far from met. He was not physically ready to endure consecutive 3-set matches, and his competitive tennis level was not sharp enough to protect him under scoreboard pressure. That withdrawal cost him another 1,000 defending points, dropping him down in the live standings and leaving him with 0 hard-court preparation before New York. In a surprising parallel, world number 1 Jannik Sinner also withdrew from Cincinnati with a knee problem. Mouratoglou analyzed Sinner's situation as well, noting that while Sinner previously proved he could win Wimbledon without a grass warm-up, entering a hard-court Grand Slam with a knee issue creates immense pressure to keep points short and blow opponents off the court. For Carlos, however, the situation is infinitely more dangerous. Sinner's knee injury didn't keep him out for 4 consecutive months. Carlos has not played a competitive match since mid-April. Now, the entire tennis universe turns to Arthur Ashe Stadium on August 30th. Carlos walks onto the most unforgiving surface in sports to defend 2,000 ranking points as the reigning US Open champion. The historical precedent against him is staggering. Since the ATP Masters format was established in 1990, not a single men's singles player has ever won the US Open after skipping both Canada and Cincinnati. 36 years of modern tennis history prove that winning 7 best-of-5 set matches on New York concrete requires competitive match repetitions to dial in timing, footwork rhythm, and crisis management. Former world number 4 José Luis Clerc spoke plainly on ESPN, warning Carlos against playing New York at all. Clerc pointed out that jumping straight into 5-set battles on hard courts is an astronomical risk that could permanently jeopardize his prime, urging him to shut down his summer and wait for the Asian swing. Acrylic hard courts offer 0 forgiveness. Unlike clay, which allows a player to slide and bleed off kinetic friction, hard concrete creates instant, rigid traction. Every sudden direction change sends violent shockwaves straight up through the feet, into the knees, and into the forearm tendons. Opponents in the US Open draw know Carlos has been out of action for over 120 days. Rival coaches are already designing aggressive tactical blueprints. Opponents will deliberately feed heavy, high-kicking topspin deep into his forehand strike zone, forcing his right wrist to lay back and absorb awkward torque. They will pull him forward with drop shots and drag him into 20-shot physical baseline wars under the suffocating New York humidity to test his endurance. Carlos Alcaraz finds himself standing at the defining crossroads of his career. Patrick Mouratoglou did not deliver his brutal assessment out of disrespect. He delivered it because 40 years of elite coaching experience have shown him that human anatomy does not care about talent, heart, or social media hype. Injury expert Stephen Smith from Kitman Labs noted that the risk of re-injury on fast concrete remains elevated when preparation is cut short. Hall of Fame coach Rick Machi, however, argued that withdrawing from Cincinnati was the smartest business decision Carlos could have made, sacrificing one warm-up event to protect the next decade of his career. Both men are right, but on August 30th, the debate ends and the trial begins. Carlos will step out under the blinding night lights of Arthur Ashe Stadium, carrying 2,000 defending points, a surgically monitored right wrist, and the weight of 36 years of tennis history on his back. He will have to prove to Patrick Mouratoglou, to his rivals, and to the entire sporting world that his generational genius is powerful enough to conquer both the physical trauma of an injury and the cold mathematical logic of the sport. The collision between clinical coaching science and human ambition is where sports history gets decided. Patrick Mouratoglou laid out a diagnosis rooted in cold, unyielding reality. Skipping competitive tune-ups leaves the body vulnerable. Serving at maximum velocity places immense torque on a recovering joint. And attempting 7 best-of-5 set matches without competitive conditioning defies athletic science. Yet, Carlos Alcaraz has spent his entire young career breaking conventional wisdom. Under head coach Samuel López, the decision has been made to test that recovering right wrist under live fire. If Mouratoglou's warnings materialize, the resulting aches, physical deconditioning, and lack of match rhythm could turn into a severe, long-term setback. But if Carlos proves Mouratoglou wrong, if that repaired tendon sheath holds firm through every high-speed snap, and his raw genius carries him through the draw, it will cement his legacy as an athlete who transcends sports science itself. The analytical blueprints are drawn, the warnings are on record, and the biological limits of a 7-time major champion are about to be pushed to the absolute edge. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you catch our real-time tactical breakdowns and injury updates the moment live play gets underway.